In this video, we're going to talk about observational studies versus experimental studies, and then also talk about different types of variables within either of those studies. In an observational study, we attempt to observe and record specific characteristics, but we don't attempt to change the subjects being studied. So here's an example. In a research poll, 1,007 adults were called after their telephone numbers were randomly generated by a computer, and 85% of those respondents were correctly able to identify what Twitter is. So again, in this situation, you can see we haven't changed the subject at all. We simply just call them, say, "Do you know what Twitter is? Yes or no?" and then hang up. So we haven't affected them at all. The converse of this is in an experiment, we actually will attempt to apply some sort of treatment and then observe the effects on the subjects. So in a clinical trial of the cholesterol drug Lipitor, 188 subjects were given 20 milligram doses of the drug, and 3.7% of them experienced nausea. So in this case, the treatment would be the drug Lipitor. This is not true for all cases of experimental studies, but sometimes with experimental studies, you will see what is called the control group. So with a control group, sometimes with an experiment, we might give the drug Lipitor to 188 subjects and then have a control group that we don't do anything to, and then we watch and see, is there any difference between what happens to the people who take the drug Lipitor and what happens to the control group? All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is explanatory, response, and lurking variables. So the purpose of an experiment or any sort of study is to investigate the relationship between two variables. When one variable causes change in another, we call that first variable the explanatory variable. The affected variable is called the response variable. So some people have heard about this in terms of independent and dependent variables. They're very similar, but we're going to just use some different terminology for statistics. It is possible that in studies there may be other variables affecting the outcome of an experiment. This is particularly true when we are working with human subjects. We call those factors lurking variables. You also may see them called confounding variables. We will use the term lurking in this course, but it's basically stuff that's happening in the background that may be affecting the results of the study. We just can't necessarily see them. All right, so we're going to take a look at two different examples, and we're going to try to identify the explanatory and response variables in the study. The first one says, the Smell and Taste Treatment and Research Foundation conducted a study to investigate whether smells can affect learning. Subjects completed mazes multiple times wearing masks. They completed the pencil and paper mazes 3 times wearing floral-scented masks and 3 times with unscented masks. Participants were assigned at random to wear floral masks during the first 3 trials or the last 3 trials. For each trial, researchers record the time that it took to complete the maze and the subject's impressions. So, let's try to identify what the explanatory and response variables are. So what is causing what? You can kind of see, what are they trying to investigate here? Whether smell can affect learning, right? So that is going to be the explanatory and response variables. The explanatory variable is going to be smell, particularly scented versus unscented, right? And floral scented at that. And the response variable is going to be learning. Again, if we want to dig deeper, learning meaning time to complete a maze. What are the treatments? Well, we just kind of set it up here. It is scented, which is floral scented, versus unscented. masks. Identify any lurking variables in the study. This is difficult sometimes for people to do, so I want you to think about this. What would be some lurking variables within the study? One example for me is if a subject had allergies, they might not do very well on a test while they were wearing scented masks. There's lots of other examples, but this is just one. Again, there are lots of right answers here. You just got to think critically about what could be affecting the study. The next one says, how does sleep deprivation affect your ability to drive? A study measured the effects of 19 professional drivers. Each driver participated in 2 experimental sessions, one after normal sleep and one after 27 hours of total sleep deprivation. These treatments were assigned in random order. In each session, performance was measured on a variety of tasks, including a driving simulation. Describe the explanatory and response variables in the study. Again, when we take a look, let's see. It says, how does something affect something, right? How does sleep deprivation affect your ability to drive? That's exactly what we're going to have for our explanatory and response variables. So, the explanatory variable would be sleep deprivation. And the response variable is going to be ability to drive. Okay? Now, what are the treatments? Let's think about what we asked the person to do. We asked that person, it was either normal sleep or 27 hours of sleep deprivation. Finally, identify any lurking variables that could interfere with the study. What are some things that could affect the study? Think about this for a second. One of the things is if somebody was allowed to have caffeine. I've also heard conversations related to what is normal sleep? How do we define normal sleep? There are lots of things that could be a lurking variable in this study.